Okay, great. So I see we have Dewi here. And do we also have Monica and Kazmita?
Yes, Karadi.
Oh, hello. Okay, great. So I will present you quickly and then hand it over to you to say what you have to say. This room is dedicated to our colleagues from Indonesia. The presentation will be in English, and we will be hearing from Monica Cristani Ndoem from the Alliance of Indigenous Peoples of the Archipelago, Dewi Kartika from the Consortium for Agrarian Reform, and Kazmita Widodo from Badan Registrasi Wilaya Adyat. Excuse my pronunciation. And they will be speaking on governance and defense of territories with formally recognized tenure and their natural resources. So please go ahead.
Where is Monica?
We're missing Monica.
Yeah.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Should we start or are we waiting for others to join?
No, I think we should start. We already have 20 participants in here, which is great.
Okay. Okay, I will share my screen first. Wait a second. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Monica, and as you can see, I'm from Indonesia, and I will do this presentation with my two other colleagues, which is Kasmita and Dewi, because in our context, this project, we did this project with 3 different organizations, just to give each of the organization chance to briefly present our own works. So these are the team. This is the team that given by colleagues from TF, and in the previous phase, we are really focusing on the recognition of indigenous peoples, not only indigenous peoples but also local communities. And so this consists of 3 organizations: AMAN, the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago, which I represent now. And then we also have BRWA, the registration body for indigenous territories. And then there is also Agrarian Reform Consortium, which is KPA. So KPA is not only focusing on indigenous issues, but also local communities. And throughout this project, the first phase of this project, we work together with these 3 organizations. Sorry. Oops. Okay, so in the first phase, we're really trying to get the recognition for indigenous peoples and local communities, and trying to get it to translate it into legal framework in Indonesia, not only at the national level, but also at the local level. And by local, I mean province and district level. So the recognition of indigenous peoples in Indonesia is quite complicated, but the laws that we have now is really sectoral. And because of that, it really relies on the recognition at the local level. So up until now, from the previous phase and support from other stakeholders, we have 149 law products for the recognition of indigenous peoples, which consists of 65 local regulations. But also there are 2 types of local regulation. The first one is for those indigenous communities who have the data already, like the maps, and then social data. For those who have the data already, then it can be we can be recognized directly through local regulation. But for those indigenous communities who don't have the data ready, but we need the regulations. Then there's other type of recognition, which we call as a local decree. Oh, sorry, the first one is local decree, and then the second one is local regulations. So for those who don't have the data ready, it can be recognized in the local regulation, but it should be there should be follow up with head of district decree. So up until now, we have 149 consists of 65 local regulations with 2 types of local regulation that I mentioned, and then 82 head of district decree, and then 2 head of district ruling. And as also mentioned by other speakers yesterday, that it is important to do the land mapping. And we also did that here in Indonesia. And up until today, we have 1,034 maps of indigenous territories, which covers area of 12.4 million hectares. But the question is, what should we do after the map? Because we don't want it to stop right there, but we want follow up by the government, and it should be adopted as also a government's document. And as I also mentioned, there's this BRWA. So we going through some different steps for the indigenous maps. The first one, of course, is recorded as the data of BRWA, and then there's registration, verification, and certification. Why we have to go through all this process? Because the government, they also have standard for all the indigenous maps that we want them to adopt. So it should go through all these processes by the BRWA first. After the mapping that is done by the community, then it is recorded by the BRWA, and there's registration process in BRWA, verification and certification, and it means it complies with the standard by the government. And then after that, we submitted the maps of indigenous territories to different kind of ministries at the national level in order to get the maps adopted, and the end product is the recognition of indigenous peoples through legal frameworks. So up until now, there are 3 types of indigenous territories that have been mapped by AMAN and also BRWA and other organizations. The first one is as you can see, we write it as not recognized because those indigenous territories, indigenous communities, they don't have any local regulations, whether it's local regulation, local decree, or the head of district decree. So none of that. There are 2.3 million hectares of indigenous territories that needs local regulation. And the second one is the regional regulation. So for those indigenous communities who already have the maps and they already have the local regulation, regional regulation, but they don't have the regional decree, which is the local decree or head of district decree. So there should be follow up by the local government and parliament. And then the third one is those indigenous communities who already have the regional regulation and the head of district decree, which covers of 2.4 million hectares. So these are the numbers that we classify from the indigenous territories that have been mapped throughout several years before. And there's also this one program by the government called social forestry, and there are 5 schemes. The one that we are trying to access is called customary forest. So that's the only scheme under the social forestry that rights based for indigenous peoples. And through this mapping, we identify that the potential for customary forest that the government can recognize or should recognize is 8.3 million hectares. But up until now, the customary forest that we have, which is the land title, the decree from the government, only covers 56 56,000 approximately hectares. So it's really far from the target and the potential that we have identified before. But the work still continue, and it should be followed up by the government. So these are the numbers if we see from the region perspective. And I pass over to Kasmita for this.
Thank you, Monique. Okay, I want to continue about the situation about how the strengthening about the system of tenures. Yeah, in this is a situation strengthening the government to adopt the data indigenous people and territory, and also about the agrarian reform acceleration. I want to share to everyone that this is some ministry. They adopt the data of indigenous people and territory, and also about the data for agrarian. From Ministry of Forestry, they already adopt the data for indigenous people to identify about the customary forest, and also about the one policy from the BIG, the Geospatial Information Network to identify about the toponym the system. And also in the presidential office staff or KSP, they use our data, indigenous territory, and also from the KPA, but the agrarian reform data, they use for the team of agrarian conflict resolution. And for the Ministry of Agrarian and Spatial Planning, or ATR BPN, this year they already starting to identify about the registration of a customary land, and there were already discussion with this minister to identify about the indigenous people territory map. And for the Minister of the National Development Planning, or Bappenas, we already discussion to the minister will adopt this data for the safeguard system for development planning and also the project infrastructure. And the one of our strategy to sustain tenure, how about we expand regional recognition from the local government to recognize of indigenous peoples. Monique, back to you. Oh yeah, okay. This is the impact post recognition of land distribution on tenure sustainability. I want to highlight some agenda or strategy after we get the recognition. And this is how the indigenous people are more confident to manage their customary territory and strengthening the customary institution. The one of the strategy, they continue with the land use planning or sustainable land use planning for the indigenous territory. So they will manage their territory and to strengthening the livelihood. And we also consolidate the central government and local government to allocated budget for the indigenous people and local community after the recognition of the rights and access to natural resources. And regarding of the data, how the indigenous territory map integrating in spatial and social data to framework the spatial planning policy, one map policy, and also development planning infrastructure safeguard in the central government and also in the local government. Over, Monique.
Yeah, thank you, Mandodo. Yeah, to add some point from Kasmita, the first one after the recognition is, of course, it becomes the legal basis for indigenous peoples, because as I mentioned, Indonesia, there are some programs that are launched by the government that can be accessed by indigenous peoples and local communities. But in order to have access to that, we have to be recognized through the local regulation that I mentioned. So after the recognition, we have access to those programs, including the customary forest that I mentioned, which is the land title from the government for indigenous peoples. And there are also some programs that can be accessed by the local communities. And of course, there are many conflicts that involve indigenous peoples with different kind of programs by the government, like conservation, or with the private sectors. And the recognition is really give indigenous peoples confidence to manage the territories and to feel safe in managing their territories. And it's really strengthening the the indigenous institution, because before they feel threatened just to manage the territories and to do all the activities inside territories. But after the recognition, of course, they feel safe to do that. And then, as also mentioned, that the indigenous peoples' agendas or interests are accommodated in regional development planning, because that's also important. After the recognition, we push so that the agenda of the government involving the agenda of indigenous peoples itself. Because after the recognition, it should be follow-up. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, Monica. We have about 8 more minutes also for questions. Just wanted to advise you, no problem.
Yeah, so on that, and then there's also a food sovereignty program. So during the crisis, we support not only indigenous peoples, but also local communities, labor, fishermen, and vulnerable communities in urban areas. So this is also part of self-governance for indigenous peoples. Over to you, Marie.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Next slide. Yeah, in terms of agrarian reform implementations, as we know that our government intend to redistribute 9 million hectares of land. So under the support of Tenure facility, in general, we are promoting people-based agrarian reform through LPRA system. So LPRA system is to strengthen the peasants' organizations as well to enlarge the space for KPA members in agrarian reform struggle, as a way also to evaluate and accelerate the implementations of government implementations on agrarian reform, to ensure the principle and objective of agrarian reform, such land inequality, agrarian land conflict, and economic injustice for peasants, farm laborers, and landless. LPRA is also to register people's farm, villages, social facilities, settlement, and areas of conflict. And LPRA is also mechanisms where bottom-up process are being promoted, because government intend to implement top-down process. So until now, we are already securing and consolidating around 955,000 hectares of land in 533 villages, and has been submitted to the government directly to the presidents and related ministries. And now we are heading to 1.7 million hectares that we want to consolidate and secure. Next. And most of the peasants and IPs, KPA members facing plantations and forestry companies, as we call as agrarian conflict. Almost 200,000 households that facing conflict with plantations companies and forestry claim. And most of them, 30%, are registered in the name of women household. So until now, under the cooperations with the President Executive Office and resolutions conflict, there are 54 locations become the priority with the government, and then there are already 2,500 hectares has been redistributed to 3,000 more peasants household, including women land ownerships. And now we are in the stage of resolving conflict for 40,000 hectares of land, and in the preparation also for land redistribution soon for 1,350 hectares of land. And then for the next phase in the upcoming tenure facility, we hope that we can reach 1.1 million hectares will be consolidated and will be advocate. Next, the last one. So as a part of scaling up the locations from LPRA, we are interfering the process to develop the Damara process. Damara is transformative agrarian reform village. So there is 4 steps, not only restructuring land control and ownership, but also restructuring the land use like for farming, for housing, for conservation area, etc. And then we also entering the process on how to restructuring the productions model based on local context. And then the last one is the most important also, especially during pandemic situations, we are also making the change in terms of distributing and consumptions, the food productions. And we want to share also about our solidarity movement, like food solidarity and economic movement, how we connect between the rural community with the urban community, farmers or peasants as the food producers interact and doing transactions with the labor and union labor in the city. So this is also how to support the labor union who facing the lost job and food shortage during the pandemic situations. So we have 11 villages who already developed agrarian reform model in local level. And for the next phase, there will be 10 villages will be developing people-based agrarian reform model in village level. So I think that's the work that has been done in the agrarian reform process, including how to make sure that women have not only involved in decision-making process, but also getting land right in terms of agrarian reform process. Thanks to, I hand it over to Monique. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are almost done with time. Thank you to all speakers though. And Monica, maybe I would ask you to just come in and answer the question in the chat from David, which is asking about regional land use planning. And if this is both at the Bupati and provincial levels, how is this IPLC advocacy going with these levels? And how can other NGOs operating in Indonesia and or the global community help? So you don't have a lot of time to address.
Yeah. We are trying to intervene this process at the district level. So we're trying to get the agenda of indigenous peoples to get into the government's agenda, because with that you can also have access to the budget from the government, and also for the map to be adopted by the government as well. That's what we're trying to intervene, the process that we're trying to intervene. Bang Dodo, mau tambahin sedikit?
Yeah, this is with the land use planning, how the government and local indigenous people try to combine the strategy, adopt from the land use planning to spatial planning in the district level. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. We have 20 seconds left, but I will pop in the chat a link to the forum, the collaboration platform online, where you can find the speakers' email addresses and see their PowerPoint. So if you want to follow up, it's easily done. Thank you to all speakers, really.
Thank you.